first been Set, and Seth, and Sithafar.
Who's this Setesh fella?
Otherwise known as Set, Seti, Seth. Ancient Egyptian god of chaos, embodiment of hostility and outright evil.
And his one true name forevermore is...
Seth is life. Seth is happiness. Seth is almighty.
Again.
Seth is life. Seth is happiness. Seth is almighty.
Welcome, friends. We're back at it once again talking Doctor Who, the penultimate episode of this first refangled Disney Plus season, Episode 7. This is the one entitled The Legend of Ruby Sunday. Now, there will be spoilers ahead. If those aren't for you, consider checking back after you've seen it. You've been warned. Let's crack into it. So I'm probably going to be a bit short in this episode. I know I keep saying that. I haven't been feeling very well, but I wanted to get at least a few thoughts out there since this is the big build-up to the season finale of Doctor Who. And did it work for me, I guess, is probably the first question I should ask. Yes and no. So the biggest thing I'd like to talk about is obviously that big reveal at the end of the episode. I'll save that for a little bit, but did everything up to that point work? Did the characters come together well? Did the storyline kind of flesh itself out? I think yes and no. While I liked most of the elements, the unit stuff was fun. The memory window, the time window, the chronovisor, whatever the hell they called that was a pretty cool concept, and for the most part, the execution was very visually pleasing, except for a couple of the shots where they were standing inside the deactivated room. Those looked a little fake, but the actual time holograms looked really cool, and I liked the way that was kind of visually shown to us, and the whole kind of confluence of time and memory being the same thing and interacting with each other to make one real. That seemed very on brand with the whole new status quo of the universe, if you want to call it that, but I felt like it was a bit too dragged out to the point where they were purposefully dragging their feet at a certain point just so the reveal could just not quite make it before the end of this episode. It's just, we're gonna get, oh no, sorry, end of episode, you gotta wait a week. It didn't feel natural or earned. It just felt like, oops, sorry. Maybe that's a little cynical way of looking at it, because obviously you don't want to blow all of the reveals in the first part of a two-parter, but it just felt like the whole Ruby's mother thing, especially the sheer amount of time we spent in that past hologram type thing, it just didn't feel like we needed as much exploration there as they gave us, considering there were a lot of other elements in this story that we could have been spending time with. All the Mel stuff, all of the unit stuff outside of there, all of the Susan technology stuff, which we did spend a good amount of time with. I just wasn't 100% on board with the amount of balance we had with the two different storylines. I know this is supposed to be the Legend of Ruby Sunday, so obviously all of the real explainers need to focus on her if it's going to be an episode surrounding her. I just would have liked a little bit maybe more of a 50-50 type stuff instead of focusing so much on the Ruby's mother reveal, and that's the one reveal that was just dragged out, and we still did not get a resolution to. But the big resolution that we did get, the revelation, whatever you want to call it, the identity of this returning character, this bad guy, the one that's been behind it all, the one who waits, the one who's been trying to do all of this stuff all along. Yes, that's correct. We get the return of Sutekh. Now, this was definitely one of the theories going around. I'm not entirely certain who started it, who came up with it first, but it was one of the theories posited out there for at least the last few episodes. And while I think this was kind of cool, I am a bit concerned with this character. I am 100% on board with them bringing back as many classic Doctor Who things as they want, revitalizing them for the new era of the show, giving them new stakes, new purpose. All of that stuff is great. The way this character was played up, not just in this episode, but in the season and the series as a whole so far, it was such a mystery and a grand reveal, and in a season of a show that's ostensibly supposed to be brand new, starting from scratch for the most part, it seemed a little bit of an odd choice the way it was just dropped in there as this fantastical revelation of, oh my god, this is such a great return for an audience who probably has no foreknowledge of who this character is. Now, there are a lot of classic Doctor Who fans who will be watching this, and I'm not trying to shade any of those people because obviously there are a lot of people that know this. But for a show that's tooling itself as the brand new start for Doctor Who on a streaming network that does not contain the rights to any other Doctor Who. So right now, at least in the US where I am, it's kind of fractured into various pieces. This very first new season, starting with the 60th anniversary stuff, that's on Disney Plus. None of the rest of it is. If you want to watch any of the rest of New Who, you'd have to go check out HBO Max. That's only rose through, I think, the Sea Devils maybe, or whatever that last Jodie thing was. That's on HBO Max. If you want to watch Classic Who, it's not even on HBO or Disney Plus. You have to go track that down on something like Pluto or I think maybe Acorn or BritBox has it and some other various places. You can find it out there. It's not that impossible to find. But you now need to have at least 3 different streaming services to really integrate all of this stuff in the US. So for a series that's playing it off as a new start, a fresh start for new people to come on board, to bring a deep-cut villain back that's nigh on impossible for the new audience to even go and find, seems like kind of an iffy choice. And maybe that was just kind of across purposes between the creatives and the business side of things. It just feels to me like this big reveal may have fallen flat, and that's what I'm kind of coming to you guys for. Are you new Who fans? Are you classic Who fans? Are you somebody who just started the show now? How did this reveal land for you, assuming you had no prior knowledge of who this character was? Is it just a big, okay, I don't know who that is, but I guess we'll wait and see, because I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. When New Who came back and we got the revelation of the Master, I didn't personally really know who the Master was at that point, but it worked within the storyline to a point where I was able to kind of fill in the context clues. Obviously, I've gone back and filled in a lot of the gaps myself after the fact, and that may be something that needs to happen here, but I'm definitely wondering how this landed for people who have absolutely no idea who Sutekh is, and that it's even a returning character to the franchise. Personally, I felt like it may have fallen flat not having that prior knowledge, but I would love to hear what you guys think. There were some other interesting little throwaway tidbits in this episode. Obviously, Harriet turned out to be the harbinger of Sutekh, and we also learned that the camera, the night of Ruby's, abandonment, I guess you could say, at that church was 66 meters away.
The camera was positioned in a storage yard 66 meters away.
Now, if you watch my whole ramble in 73 yards, you probably remember that 66 meters is basically almost roughly 73 yards. It's like 66.67 or something like that. But for the sake of argument, let's just say 66 meters and 73 yards are the same thing. Was that supposed to be a clue as to the relationship of Ruby and her mother? Was it just supposed to be a wink, wink, nudge, nudge throwaway line because we know they actually researched how far away you can actually visibly see somebody's face without it being blurred, and that is that's the conclusion they came to? Or is it actually supposed to be something more meaningful, and we'll learn that Ruby is her own mother, or that other woman who was in 73 yards who kind of had that interesting forced relationship, I guess we could say, with Gwilliam? Is that going to be the mother, or am I overthinking things once again, and that was just a fun callback throwaway line to another episode? Personally, probably still my favorite episode of this season. I actually like that right at the beginning, the Doctor called out the whole, well, obviously this S-Triad thing is just an anagram for TARDIS, and I have this granddaughter named Susan, and clearly Susan Twist's, well, Susan Triad, I guess is her real name in the show, is going to turn out to be Susan. I just need to go meet her. This whole backstory about who Susan is has been sprinkled a little bit throughout the series so far, or the season, I should say. So to have that kind of blatantly called out and just thrown in our faces as, no, that was the obvious breadcrumbing we were doing, that's not going to be the real answer, I liked that it was played up that way. However, I 100% assume we are going to see the real, actual Susan at some point. Whether or not that turns out to be Mrs. Flood, I'm not certain. I hope not. Personally, I think if they're going to bring Susan back, they need to bring in the original actress while she is still with us. That's just maybe my opinion, and that remains to be seen. This could all change and blow up in the next episode. So while I liked most of the elements within this episode, I think the main problem I had is they weren't divvied up correctly, and it felt like the episode was a little bit at odds with itself, and I'm hopeful that the resolution will just knock it out of the park, because everything that was introduced in this episode worked for me outside of a few moments that just felt like they were just trailing on a little bit too long, but I'm definitely excited to see where we go from here. I don't really know how they're going to wrap things up and if they're going to be pulling in more characters. Obviously, there was some kind of contention over what's going on with the TARDIS, so are they going to need to bring in the 14th Doctor's TARDIS to kind of rectify things? And if that's the case, it will feel a little bit odd to not have David Tennant and or Donna show up with that TARDIS. That's just one of those downsides I felt like they were setting up when they were creating a tangential timeline with two doctors existing on Earth at the same time. It's always going to feel a little bit odd when the other one doesn't show up to kind of deal with these existential crises, but that's just my thoughts. What did you think of this episode? Are you excited to see the finale? Leave all your thoughts down below, especially how you felt the Sutekh reveal actually came across, whether or not you knew about it or not. Whatever you think, leave that down below. Like, share, subscribe, and until next time...